Okay, thank you. Good to be with you. Welcome. My name's Andrew Webb, Methodist Minister in the Skipton and Grassington Circuit and Rural Lead for the Yorkshire West District. So I'm just going to lead us in some prayers as we begin. I'm just going to read first of all from a book that I've just been given called Everyday Nature, which just gives a reflection for each day. So this is the reflection for the 11th of February, and it's called Conquer Bud. It's too cold and breezy for wildlife. Everything is hunkered down. So today is a day for noticing tree buds. They start to swell at this time of year, and when the dog of winter growls again, as it is wont to do in February, a tree bud is a good reminder that the hound will soon be cowering before the summer sun. Tree buds all look the same, don't they? But look closer and you'll see ash, black and soot-like, or maybe beech, sharp, brown and pointed. And if you can find one though, the horse chestnut, our conker tree, is the most distinctive of all. They are acorn-sized with a sharp point and are sticky to the touch. You may return during summer to see the white candelabra flowers and in autumn for some deep brown conkers. But in February, you'll have to imagine all of that promise contained within a sticky bud. The reflection speaks of a bud that's full of promise and potential. A good image as we consider our rural churches and communities, often small in number and limited in resources, and yet full of potential. God is a God of potential, of yeast and seeds, small things that can have a big impact. So today we recognize God at work and allow his potential to flourish. Let us pray. God of ever new beginnings, God in whom past, present and future permanently coalesce. As the year unfolds before us, through the dark days of winter, through the vagaries of the weather, through storm, flood, ice or snow, though personal difficulties may beset us, help us always to remember that your light shines through the deepest darkness, that your love surrounds and summons us, that your life is stronger than death itself, and that your grace sustains us and is sufficient for all our needs. Amen. I'm really pleased to be able to welcome our two speakers for today. First of all, to welcome Richard Teal. Richard, who is a Methodist minister, and throughout his ministry has been a great advocate for the farming community and for rural communities. Richard is currently the president of the Methodist Conference. I'm also pleased to welcome Sarah Moore, a United Reformed minister who is currently transitional champion in the United Reformed Church National Synod of Scotland. And Richard and Sarah served alongside each other in Cumbria when Richard was chair of the Cumbria Methodist District and Sarah was president of the United Reformed Church in Cumbria. And they both played a big part in the establishing of mission communities in Cumbria, and we look forward to hearing from them both. I think Richard's going to share first.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces on the screen today. It's lovely to have been asked to share with you. And first of all, Sarah and I are going to share, as Andrew said, about the ecumenical scene in Cumbria from a rural perspective. And then the second part, we'll be looking at making the rural voice heard. So I do hope that, if we can have the first slide, please, Catherine. I hope that what we've got to share here with some help and some interest to you in your thinking about the rural church in relation to ecumenical working, which is what Sarah and I have been asked to speak about and share with you in the first part of this afternoon. For 11 years, I was chair, as Andrew has said, of the Cumbria Methodist District, the first so-called ecumenical county in Great Britain. Methodists, Anglicans, United Reformed Church and Salvation Army are partners together across that very large, sparsely populated, beautiful and yet poverty-stricken rural area. With 4 other companion denominations, the Roman Catholics, the Baptists, the Church of Scotland and the Quakers. We worked very closely with one another for 3 main reasons. The first reason was a very simple one. When I arrived in Cumbria, James Newcomb, who became the Bishop of Carlisle, and the then URC moderator, Rachel Coulman, and I met together for the first time. We shared some food, we shared some conversation together, and we completed our time together by praying together. And during that time of prayer, to the three of us at the very same time, God said, "It's my will that this county of Cumbria becomes an ecumenical county with all Christians working together and missioning together." It was a hugely powerful experience for the three of us. And that vision became ingrained in our hearts and a huge inspiration. So ecumenism began in the county not with shared doctrine, not with managing rural decline, but in prayer and seeing each other as children of God on an equal basis. And it was good relationships which brought around the ecumenical county, and they still remain to be one of the most important facts in its success. When David Cornick was the General Secretary of the Churches Together in England, when he came to do his review of Cumbria, he said this: "None of the ecumenical developments in Cumbria would have been possible without the profound depth of relationship between the church leaders. We have seen this," he continues, "over the years most clearly at county level, and it is quite remarkable. We appreciate that this is dependent on the particular blend of personalities involved and the depth in their ecumenical understanding and tolerance. Without them, this pioneering work would never have begun." The second is that we believe it is a biblical imperative. St. John 17, which we know so well, Jesus prays that his followers may be one. Diversity is one thing, and in Cumbria we rejoiced in our different traditions, and there was no talk really of us becoming one physically united church in that sense. Indeed, our traditions, our denominations became even more important as time went on, and I'll mention that a little later. But division is another, and we believe that it is a very poor witness to the world. Which takes me to my third main reason for our unity, and that was a shared desire to reach out in mission with the gospel of Jesus to everyone who lives in Cumbria, as well as the millions of tourists who visit the county each year. And Sarah will say a little bit more about that in a few moments' time. Second slide, please. Near the end of my time in Cumbria, we had an ecumenical mission to the county called Moving Mountains. The most frequent comment from the 125 people who came to help us, which included Anglican bishops, Methodist chairs of district, URC moderators, Salvation Army leaders, was, "We haven't seen such close cooperation between denominations anywhere else." And alongside this, Cumbria's had more than its fair share of tragedies. Next slide, please. In the 11 years that I was there, I arrived on the back of foot and mouth, which had caused, as you all know, devastation to rural and agricultural counties like Cumbria and everywhere else. This was followed, next slide please, with the floods of 2009 and 2014, which were absolutely devastating floods in the county. This is just a little photograph here, a slide from part of Kendal. And then the next slide, the shootings of 2010, which are rated in their gravity alongside Hungerford and Dundlane. And this is me just taking one of the memorial services on the beach at Seascale on the west coast of Cumbria, where 800 people turned up in that little village of Seascale, where 2 people have been shot by Derek Bird. Responding to these has drawn the churches much closer together, as they have responded to basic human need in just so many ways. Their response to these disasters has established the churches as a serious player in the eyes of Cumbria's administrative and political structures. That slide can go if you'd like, Katrina. Working together at these times has forged very strong relationships, which have resulted in the desire for the churches to work and to grow together ever more deeply. And these relationships have been facilitated by the unique and challenging geography of Cumbria. Here, denominations which at one time may have been wary of each other in other places have grown together in understanding and in mutual support. In 2011, the tripartite conversations, that was Methodist, Anglican and URC, reached agreement in 3 areas, and they were shared mission, common ministry, and an imaginative use of buildings. These key principles were carefully worded into a declaration of intent and signed on Advent Sunday 2011 at a great service in Windermere. And this really marked a new chapter in the life of the county. This was signed by the 3 church leaders and 3 denominations, but also 5 other denominations were in attendance and gave their full support. The Roman Catholic Church with the Bishop, the Church of Scotland, the Salvation Army, the Society of Friends, and the Baptist Church. Since then, and with tremendous rejoicing, the Salvation Army has joined the covenanted partnership in the United Area, which covers the whole of the county of Cumbria. So what does this shared mission mean? It comes first in the Cumbria Declaration of Intent, and we believe that mission should be first. Cumbria's over 500,000 residents, but up to 20 million visitors a year. Everything we are doing has mission at its very heart. As people were formed into mission communities, which Sarah will talk about in a few moments' time, we would not do anything separate that could not be done together. Just imagine an alpha course or a holiday club or a house group or whatever being planned together in your village and led together. So there's more people and more resources about to help, and much more is achievable together rather than separate. And what a witness it gives to the community about the integrity of the gospel. And secondly, the shared ministry. Cumbria became a CPEA, which means a covenanted partnership in the United Area. This gives permission on all sides to share ministry. As chair of the district, I would find myself on a Sunday very often preaching and presiding at an Anglican Eucharist using an Anglican liturgy. The bishop would be leading worship in the Methodist chapel and the URC president would be somewhere else. It was just normal and became simply accepted. Local clergy, lay readers, local preachers were leading in each other's denominations. Now, in scattered rural communities where resources of all kinds are scarce, what a wonderful opportunity this created. And sharing ministry was not an abstract idea. I have just shared with you what happened when we were able to take it further. So, for instance, a Methodist minister, well, 2 actually, served as team vicars. When I was having trouble filling an appointment in Kenborough, that lovely market town, due to something which went wrong, I simply went to see the bishop because Methodism couldn't supply anybody. And within minutes, we had a newly retired Anglican clergy person being offered to fill that appointment for 12 months. And amazingly, when the concern was the other way around, a Methodist minister stepped in. We did not have long interregnums because we simply shared ministry. And in rural areas where sometimes we are without clergy, this did not happen in Cumbria because together we provided it. There was enormous trust, enormous acceptance, and enormous love for each other. And thirdly, shared buildings. In Cumbria, we have over 600 church buildings, considerably more than we would if we were starting from scratch. Some tiny villages have 3 churches for a population of less than 100. So now we're looking at ways of sharing what we have and using all that plant wisely and collaboratively rather than in ridiculous competition. And then what are the denominations? What are the denominations? There has not been talk of leaving the denominations. We rejoice in our diversity. But what has surprised me is that Methodist communities, Methodist churches are saying to me, Richard, what makes a Methodist a Methodist? And I found myself, as other church leaders did, going around the county leading workshops. And for me, it was working on why a Methodist Methodist? What's our Methodist identity? What are the charisms of Methodism? On the whole, people were ignorant about their roots and what their denominations stood for and made them different from each other and what all that meant in the 21st century. Now, I could say much more, time doesn't allow, but I hope these words have just given you a flavour. 11 years in Cumbria, for me, was totally inspiring ecumenically. I've returned now to circuit ministry in a very different scene altogether, which I find totally disturbing after I've lived the vision of for such a long time with my brothers and sisters in Christ equally. And I plead with you to give it a go, not because unity is God's will, which I believe it is, not just because in the face of growing secularism it makes pragmatic sense, which I believe it does, but in particular that the world may be. And I now hand over to Sarah to talk about mission communities. Good to see you, Sarah.
Hello, really good to see you, Richard. Hello, everybody. Really lovely to be here with you. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Sarah Moore. I'm a United Reformed Church minister. When I worked alongside Richard in Cumbria for, I can't remember now how long it was, Richard, 7 or 8 years or so.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Yes. And I was, at that point, I was United Reformed Church area president. So I was the United Reformed Church leader for the county of Cumbria. I wonder whether it might be possible for me to share my screen. Is it set up for me to be able to do that? Whoever the host is.
Catherine, can you allow Sarah to share her?
Oh yeah, I am the host now. I can see
right,
the
excellent. Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, so you should now be able to see a presentation entitled All About God for All. So Richard has introduced a bit to you. I didn't catch the beginning of Richard's presentation because I had issues getting into the meeting. I'm not quite sure what was to do, but figured it out eventually. So God for All was the ecumenical mission strategy which we adopted together, which, as Richard has already explained, came out of a covenant where we worked together and agreed the declaration to work together as closely as we could in mission, ministry, and in strategic use of church buildings. And one of the things which then arose out of that with the subsequent strategy work which we did was the God for All initiative. And God for All is still running in Cumbria. You can look up their website anytime you want to. So the web address is godforall.org.uk, and that will give you information about where the work is now. So the strap line that we agreed, I would guess probably in around about 2013, 2014 or so, was this one, which is on the screen in front of you. By 2020, every person in Cumbria of all ages and backgrounds will have an opportunity to discover more of God and God's purpose for their lives, so that they will discover more of Jesus and the good news and become followers of Jesus within a Christian community. So it was very much a mission strategy. My experience, I don't know what yours are in different places around Yorkshire where you work, is that quite often when ecumenical covenants get signed, they kind of get signed and then they get put away in a filing cabinet and no one does anything. Whereas in Cumbria, we weren't like that. We decided from the beginning that we wanted it to be active, wanted it to make a difference. And so then the strategies reflect that. So Richard's already introduced the idea of the ecumenical county. There's in the faded back, but you can see Richard and I in the photo signing the second version of the covenant in 2016 when the Salvation Army became full partners. So Richard's already introduced these aspects of the work to you. So what did the strategy actually include? So it was the main backbone of the strategy, and continues to be so, is around mission communities. A value to the importance of engaging people who are beyond the usual reach of our churches, and to particularly focus around pioneering and fresh expressions. And I'll tell you a bit more about how in Cumbria we tried to do that. So mission communities, there's a summary on the screen in front of you. So ecumenical groupings of churches from the four partners and others where appropriate, working together in mission. So there was an element of which these came about as a response to reducing numbers of stipendiary clergy and ministers in all three denominations. But very much saying that churches would come together in local areas for the purposes of mission. And the thinking was that if churches came together in mission, then being able to share other things. So, for example, ministers, for example, buildings would then come along later as a outworking of this yearning and actuality of working together in mission. Mission communities are a mix of traditional churches and fresh expression and pioneering projects. At the time that I wrote this presentation, which was in the autumn of 2019, there were over 100 fresh expressions of church or pioneering projects in Cumbria. And so within our Church of England colleagues, they consider that to be the equivalent of a fourth Anglican archdeaconry. So Cumbria is entirely the Diocese of Carlisle, and that's divided into 3 archdeaconries. And they considered that the fresh expressions piece was like having a fourth archdeaconry. They never got around to appointing a fresh expressions archdeacon, which might have been quite interesting, but that's the kind of numbers that we were talking about. Mission communities are led by ministry teams that include lay and ordained ministers. And again, at that stage in 2019, there were around about 40 mission communities across Cumbria at various stages of development. So some of them have, very much stage very much starting out, others a bit further along the way, others, fully flourishing, set up and working groups together. So in terms of how the partner churches supported God for All, so the structures, the denominations tried to work together as best that we could. So Synod in the York case of the United Reformed Church, District in the case of the Methodist Church, Anglican Diocese and the Salvation Army Division. The URC put in the special category post, which I held for 8 years. And then we were able to access a considerable amount of grant funding from both the Church of England and from the Methodist Church, which was used to employ the God for All team. We had some county projects around growing leaders. So part of the ministry aspect of the strategy was around developing vocations. So trying to get more people to consider some form of ministry, possibly ordained ministries, otherwise lay ministries of all forms. Richard's mentioned the Moving Mountains mission that we had, led by the Archbishop of York. Lots of work around the support of local churches, lots of work around fresh expressions. I'm conscious that what I was asked to speak about was a bit more about mission communities. So very much thinking about how to be together, how to be church on the ground. So Cumbria, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is a really mixed county. Some areas that are quite urban, looking at Carlisle, Barrow in Furness, Workington, Whitehaven, much more urban type, through to very, very rural. So encouraging churches to look to each other as being their primary resources in mission. I think we did pretty well at getting rid of any kind of sense of competition, which you sometimes get between neighbouring churches, certainly between churches that were within the 4 partner denominations. Mission communities are led by a mission community leader, whose role would be to kind of try and hold the mission community together, try and develop it, try and develop ministries and vocations within a mission community. And I think that role probably was key in terms of moving mission communities forwards, because there was somebody whose job it was to say how we're going to work together. And the archdeacons were ecumenical strategy development officers. And those were very firmly ecumenical posts. And they had the brief, particularly from the Bishop of Carlisle, but also from Richards and I, and from our Salvation Army counterpart, to say, from our point of view, it's okay to say, get on and do the ecumenical thing. Sometimes there's a temptation that colleagues might prioritise their own congregation, and having been in local church ministry, I understand that. But to say, actually, your role in this context is to develop this ecumenical mission community thing. And so that they're now moving forward with that. I saw on social media a week or two ago that one of the mission communities has had a Zoom mission community commissioning, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. And I was really heartened to hear that even through COVID, all of this work is still continuing. Much of what we tried to do in Cumbria was around being experimental and imaginative. So from a leadership point of view, we would say to mission communities, give things a go. Don't, it doesn't matter if, obviously we want you to succeed, but don't worry if you have problems and challenges doing it. Just crack on with that. We encouraged mission communities and churches and individual Christians to think about how could they try out new ways of being and doing church. So there are all sorts of things developed in Cumbria. So for a number of years, a digital evangelist was employed. And she came into Cumbria from a background of work of promoting Christian Aid Week. So very much a marketing specialist, but came up with this idea of encouraging the community to pray. I can remember for 1 year for Valentine's Day, obviously quite topical this week, it was God Knows You're Gorgeous campaign. She also developed some radio adverts that were broadcast on local commercial radio during Advent. So there were lots and lots of different pieces to God for All and how that worked. So, finally, I think one of the things I want to say is there's lots happening in Cumbria. It's an exciting or at least when Richard and I worked there, I certainly found it to be an exciting and innovative way to be church. Certainly, hearing Richard and I have chatted a bit preparing for today, and comparing both of our ministries now with what we had in Cumbria, and Cumbria was incredible in the ecumenical commitment and passion and interest. The assumption was it was working ecumenically was a natural way to work. For the most part, certainly by the time I left, and I just left a few months after Richard did. Very much, why on earth wouldn't we work together? And the ecumenical really was the starting point. So God for All and the Ecumenical County works very closely with other churches in Cumbria, as Richard mentioned, through Churches Together in Cumbria. And that was particularly around social action. So there was a much bigger constituency of churches that work together in mission in those ways. So social action, environmental issues, domestic violence awareness, and one or two other things. I'm aware that the county has, since Richard and I left, so this is a kind of, if you want to know more about this, you need to ask somebody who works in Cumbria now, not Richard or I, but a vision refresh process, which looked to renew the vision and strategy, continuing to be missional and ecumenical. And out of that process, they came out with 4 values as to what's happening in Cumbria now, which are follow daily, care deeply, speak boldly, and tread gently. So, and I've heard bits and pieces and read little bits and pieces online about that, and it sounds really exciting. So, but I said, if you want to know more, certainly about what's happening now, the website you need to look at is godforall.org.uk. We developed a God for All prayer, which I used absolutely everywhere I went. I don't know whether you did, Richard, which was this. I tended to use this as part of the blessing at the end, if I was leading worship on a Sunday at the end of a service, and would use it in meetings and at other times too. But again, that was a really helpful thing that we came back to. It was used ecumenically. We encouraged churches to pray for each other. So a huge part of what we did. I haven't got a huge amount else to say. Thank you. I don't know if Richard has anything to add from what I've just said.
No, that was great, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed. And I think we've virtually kept to time too between us.
Well done. Yes,
you.
thank you so much, both of you, to Richard and to Sarah. You've kept to time very well. We're going to go into breakout rooms now for 10 minutes. And really the question for our breakout rooms is, from all that you've heard, what can you imagine using in your locality? So a nice broad question, and you'll have a facilitator with you, and then we'll come back together and feedback before we have a very short break.
People are back. We're going to hand back over to Richard, and we're looking forward to hearing Richard speaking about hearing the rural voice. So I'm going to hand over to Richard now.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello everybody again. Can we have the first slide, please, Catherine? And so here we're thinking about making the rural voice heard. How do we make the rural voice heard? It's not an easy question to answer, but we're going to have a bash at this afternoon. The radio programme, The Archers, has now been going since 1951, having aired over 19,300 episodes and draws in a large audience, including the Secretary of the Methodist Conference. But in more recent years, rural and countryside programmes have expanded like mad on the television. Programmes like Country File, Escape to the Country, Yorkshire Dales and Lakes, of which we have a star with us this afternoon, Winter Watch, Autumn Watch, Spring Watch, Summer Watch, Cornwall and Devon, Our Yorkshire Farm, the Yorkshire Vet, A Wild Year, now the new All Creatures Great and Small, which is wonderful, just to name a few. You maybe add your own to that list. People are fascinated with rural. People are fascinated with the countryside. And I'm amazed at this fascination, and it certainly gives us a voice to speak into and out of when programmes connect with the reality of rural and not with the rural idyll. So, for example, the programme Escape to the Country says it's all because rural life is not an escapism by any means. I believe we have a voice, but our voices are not heard as strongly as they should be and could be, but we also need to have people to listen to us. It could be levelled at us at times that the rural community whinges. There's no doubt about it, it does. So we need to tell the good, positive rural story, and I'm going to suggest 5. So next slide, please, Catherine. Tell the good story about the interdependence of rural and urban, the interdependence. We actually need each other, and we need each other in a variety of ways. Firstly, by feeding the nation. Farmers are there day by day to produce food, not just in times of panic buying, but day by day, not just for rural people, but for the whole of our nations. Farming is actually integral, agriculture is integral to who we are. Secondly, there's the beauty and appreciation of the countryside, not just for rural people, but for urban people too. Then there's a rural economy, the urban economy, which is dependent upon rural businesses for food, for water, for wood, for raw material, which are products of the rural ecosystem. Then there's a rise in the urban development. By 2050, 7 out of 10 people globally will live within cities. And then there's twinning. I think twinning is hugely, hugely important to tell the good story, particularly rural churches twinning with inner city or urban churches. And many rural people work in urban areas. They may live in the rural community, but they travel to work daily. And then there's poverty. Let's have the next slide, please. You'll see from this slide that 50% of rural people live in poverty, 50%. Now, this is a way in which we certainly can make our voice heard, because it's roughly the same figure as people who live in urban areas. This isn't widely known, it's not widely accepted either, but this is the latest development from the work of the University of Newcastle. Rural poverty is hidden, it's hard to see. Urban poverty is there for us all to see, but it is the same. So let's move to the next slide. And those who experienced rural poverty between 1991 and 2008 are there for you to see. There are many reasons why rural people are disadvantaged, but equally true, many urban people are also disadvantaged. So we should never ever be pushing a wedge between the two. We're actually interdependent upon each other. Let's move on then from interdependence onto smallness in the next slide. The good story to tell is the importance of smallness. Much that goes on in rural areas appears contrary to the big and the glamorous and the sexy. It can seem that the rural is countercultural to the norm. Small is beautiful. But smallness should never be despised. Little is the true essence of the rural. Just read the Gospels to see that. And little things go on in rural areas which you just never heard about. They don't catch the news, but they make a huge impact. I think of a little village chapel that I have just 2 miles away from where I'm sitting now, a little place called Nafferton, which during lockdown 1 sent a little note to every single household in the village. This is a Methodist chapel of 18 members saying, we're here for you. If you're lonely and need to talk, let us know. If you need some shopping, let us know. If you need your prescription picked up from the GP, let us know. If you're without food and have a family, let us know. After lockdown 1, that congregation grew by 50% because that little village Methodist chapel connected with its community. It's not been heard about, it's never been on the news, it's a small thing, but the impact has been huge. I think of the little village chapel in Lessingham in East Anglia, where they've started a telephone conference service. I preached there twice already. I didn't know how on earth it would go. A little village chapel of 6 members, now with a congregation of well over 30, all of them from the village, on the telephone on a Sunday. I think of a lay worker in the Northampton district who I met, who has 7 village churches to look after. How on earth can she look after those people pastorally? 7 small villages, mostly elderly people without broadband. And she's done something very old-fashioned. She writes to them on a Monday a pastoral letter every week, but not only a pastoral letter within it, there's lots of ideas of what to do during the week. It's a very small thing, but it's created friendship, it's created community, it's created those people waiting for that letter to arrive on a Tuesday. Huge things come from it. Last September, the Vice President and I composed, it's a very small thing to do, compose a pastoral letter to the agricultural community, and we sent to as many farmers as we could. The day before Christmas Eve, I got a phone call from somebody in the south of England to say that her parents had asked her to come over to their farm. They had received in the post that morning our pastoral letter. They were not Methodists, nothing to do with the Methodist Church whatsoever. But they said, just look at this, it's been pinned upon their fridge. To think for the first time, and even people in the 60s, for the first time that the church was bothering about people who were going through difficulty. They were overjoyed about it, and they said that is the way it would stay. A very small thing, huge impact. When I was chair of the Cumbria district, every year we had students training and forming for ministry from Queen's. They came to this rural county to learn about rural ministry. The majority of them have never been in rural ministry whatsoever, and most of them would not want to go into rural ministry. But the big thing was some were converted to rural ministry, but every single one of them was so impressed by the relationship between the chapel and the community. We've never come across anything like this, where the chapel was so integrated in small ways in the life of the community. And think of Aunt Maud. Aunt Maud sees herself as a Christian in the community. You all know her. She loves everyone, and the community knows that Aunt Maud goes to the Methodist chapel and loves Jesus. She doesn't see herself as an evangelist, but she is. And the number of people's lives over the years who have been positively affected by Auntie Maud for the sake of the kingdom has been profound. Success in rural areas must never be dependent on the numbers game, and we should get away from it. Just listen to some of the many positives of a small rural church. Almost everyone knows everyone else. It feels like a family. Everyone is important and needed. Organisation is simple, communication rapid and effective. It's rooted in its history. It's relational. It feels like a New Testament church. It's people-centred. The congregation laugh together and they cry together. They eat together. Children belong to the whole church. It's intergenerational and integrated. It's tough and it's tenacious. And these words, which I have pinned up on my office door, it says about the small rural church. In a big world, the small church has remained intimate. In a fast world, the small church has been steady. In an expensive world, the small church has remained plain. In a complex world, the small church has remained simple. In a rational world, the small church has kept feelings. In a mobile world, the small church has been an anchor. In an anonymous world, the small church calls us by name. Smallness, important. Now, thirdly, I want us to move on to listen to a moment or two about climate change and to tell the good story about climate change from British agriculture. British agriculture, which has committed itself to net zero by 2040, 10 years ahead of the government who are saying 2050. There's enormous misinformation which goes out about the agricultural community in this country of ours. And we have to tell that good story. And as a number of you know, I'm meeting farmers wherever I go at the moment and people from the rural community. And really at the top of the list each time, not brought about by me, but by the agricultural community themselves and the NFU, is this whole area of climate change and what agriculture can and must and will offer to the change so positively. So we just see a very short video about it, which tells the good story.
My name is Caroline Knox. We farm in the Arison Valley and the Isle of Wight, and we grow arable crops, mainly now for the biogas industry here on the island.
Hello, I'm Harry Parry. I farm with my wife and my parents on a lowland farm on the Llŷn Peninsula and a hill farm up by not far from Caernarfon.
My name is Philip Crawley. I'm Vice Chair of the National Poultry Board. We're on one of our sites in northwest Leicestershire with 96,000 free-range birds. As a business, we produce, pack and market eggs for retail sale.
This is a 6-megawatt biogas plant. It was set up by a partnership of farmers on the island. It's central to everything that we do on our farm now. We're lucky enough to farm in the Arison Valley, which is a very fertile arable area of land. And everything we do now is fed into this plant. We also take away a large proportion of the digestate, both liquid and solid, which we can pump the liquid by underground pipes over our whole farm. Our main crop is maize and hybrid rye.
Back in 2010, we started with free-range poultry in this field. It now has, with additional land, 96,000 birds in 3 32,000 bird units, and we've planted in excess of 40 acres of trees across the field. These behind me are some of the original trees we planted. These were planted back in 1999. As you can see now, they've matured beautifully over the years, and I'm very pleased with what they do. As a farm, we have 8 different PV systems varying from 20 kilowatt up to 200 kilowatt. They were installed all between 2012 and 2015. Overall, they contribute around 40% of the company's energy usage.
As farmers, we've got a big role in reducing our carbon footprint, helping the environment, but still produce food of high quality, high welfare standard. Being as efficient as we can on the farm, a big part of that is obviously having a better profitability of our business, but huge correlation to that is reducing carbon.
And then, fourthly, to tell the good story of the truth behind animal welfare and red meat. I don't want to get into the vegan debate. People just simply have choices, and that's right and that's proper. But again, I think there is around at the moment by a certain lobby of people misinformation about eating of red meat and of the importance of animal welfare. And let's just have a look at another little video about that, which tells the good and the true story.
So today I'm here on this beautiful farm taking full advantage of this glorious winter sunshine to learn a little bit more about beef and lamb farming. So you hear a lot in the media about red meat, but I wanted to find out its actual environmental impact and what the British standards are like here in the UK. So I'm going to be talking to Richard, who is a livestock farmer, and he's going to be telling me all about his daily life as a farmer and the standards that he works to. Richard, thank you so much for having us on the farm today. It is amazing to come and actually see how beef and lamb is produced and where it comes from, because there's such a big difference between what we see on the supermarket shelves to actually finding out where it comes from and how it's looked after and everything else. So how long have you been a farmer?
So I've been on the farm fully for 10 years. That's after I finished university, went travelling for a year and saw other farming systems throughout the world. Worked on a few neighbouring farms, and I came back here to work on the family farm with my dad and uncle. So once we've been around and checked that everything is healthy and well, we then crack on with making sure everything has got clean bedding, so everything is comfortable and they've all got good food in front of them and everything is nice and clean. And then it's all the other jobs, so it might be fencing, it might be checking the crops, it might be checking around the grass field, see how the grass is growing. It just really changes with the seasons. Every season has different jobs to do.
As a consumer, we assume that as a farmer, your job is actually just looking after the cattle, but it's not. The whole farm, all the land and everything is a huge job to maintain and look after, isn't it?
Like the whole ecosystem runs off this farm. So as well as all the livestock and sheep, you know, we've got all the deer and the hares and the foxes and all the wildlife that kind of rely on this farm. So it's up to us to keep the place in good shape and just manage the countryside as well as managing our animals and crops.
And you were saying earlier when we were out with the sheep about the field and that how you left one of the fields for the summer because there was so much wildlife in it.
Yeah, so every decision is intertwined. So the health of the animals come first, and then it's kind of the long-term wider effects on the farm. And then we also have to consider our environmental impact, be that the carbon we're producing or also the habitat that we're producing as well. So whether that be a grassland, which is really good for the wildlife, as in the butterflies and the insects and the pollinators, or a hedgerow when we cut the hedges to allow the nesting season to be as productive as possible, because we want the wildlife to thrive on this farm as well as our livestock. We did a massive farm audit of our carbon last year, and then we can work out from there where our most carbon efficient areas are and where we need to improve. So from that we can analyse and we can work out what we can do. For instance, we're now reducing the fertiliser on our grassland, try and make ourselves more environmentally sensitive and produce beef with a much lower carbon footprint.
So in terms of animal welfare, what do you look for when you're taking care of the cattle? What are the healthy signs that they should have?
So the more you work with livestock, the more you get to know them. And the key is you can tell when they're not themselves, and that's when they're under the weather. So basically by spending time getting in here and bedding them down, you can generally just pick up these small little things that they are not quite right, and then from there you can analyse what the issues are and make it right for them. And we work very closely with our vets, which is one of the Red Tractor standards, and that helps us analyse what our issues are and improve year on year.
So what do they eat in terms of food? What do they have?
So most of the year they're outside in the grass and they're eating purely the grass that they are grazing. They're finding which bits they like, finding which bits they don't, and that's what they eat all summer long. But when we bring them inside for the winter, because the grass gets too wet and the soil gets really muddy, that's when we put them onto silage. So this is all grass grown on the farm in the spring, and then we wrap it up and we store it so that it can pickle and preserve its goodness for them to eat during the winter.
And that's interesting that you say that they come in for the winter, so they don't stay out all year round.
So we leave them out for as long as physically possible, because it's a lot less work for us to go and check on them in the field than actually bring them in, bed them down, bring the food to them. It's a big expense and task for us. Because they weigh up to a ton, and on those 4 legs pushing down the soil, they can soon turn a nice grass field into a muddy mess, just like the end of a festival. And we can't have our pasture turning into that. For one fact, that's an environmental nightmare, because all that mud can run off into the streams along with the cow poo. But also, that pasture is never going to be as good again. So we've got to take into consideration the health of the animals being out in the winter, but also the health of our pasture and the effect that's going to have on the environment.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those 2 little videos. I mean, in that last one there, Richard, what a good farmer he obviously is, and is telling what I found to be the real interest and true story which farming is propagating today, that we get so much misinformation around, and that's worrying. On Saturday afternoon, I was in the Bristol district for 3 days, and I met with the young farmers in Somerset, and I had a fantastic, and I really mean a fantastic meeting with a whole group of young farmers, and their absolute 100% commitment to climate change was just unbelievable. So let's move on to the last point, which is my 5th, and you may have lots of others, and I'm sure you will have. And the 5th point is tell the good education story. So can we just have that slide, please, Catherine, the good education story? It was the last one.
Yeah, sorry, hang on a minute. Can you keep talking, Richard, while I find it? Sorry,
no problem at all. It's just got 2 books on it, and just bring it up when you can. So tell the good education story. The agricultural bill of last year was a huge worry to the agricultural community, but the National Farmers Union campaign, which within days was signed by over 1 million people, seemed to me to suggest that the British public were actually behind the agricultural community. We need to tell that story. 1 or 2 things we can't do at the moment, but are so important of telling the good education story. Farm visits for children need to be propagated and expanded when we're able to do them. Not just educating children about agriculture and rural life, but their teachers too. Open Farm Sundays have been a huge success in the past. Again, an educational means. The agricultural shows. This year as president, I was supposed to be preaching at 3 agricultural shows, the one in Yorkshire, one in Wales, and one in Cornwall. But of course, they all had to be cancelled. I've been asked for this next year to preach, but again, they've all been cancelled. But agricultural shows were a wonderful way of bringing urban and rural people together and educating about the good education story of rural. These 2 books, which have appeared on your screen, if you haven't read them, you need to read them, by James Rebank. James Rebank's a fascinating story, a shepherd in Cumbria. His first book, The Shepherd's Life, is just stunning, but his most latest English pastoral, again, is it's just brilliant about how agriculture was, how agriculture has changed, and how agriculture is moving so much in the whole area of climate change. It's super easy reading, just fantastic. We need to tell the good story of digital connectivity. I know that in rural areas, it isn't everywhere. It's not as strong as it should be everywhere, but the way digital connectivity has developed within the rural scene is really great in helping people log on and have businesses, etc. Farm shops, I don't know what your feeling are on farm shops, but during lockdown, it seems to me that farm shops have really taken on a new lease of life. And the ones that I see usually have queues of people. But what they have done during lockdown, I think, has been amazing in helping people understand where their food comes from, how they can trace their food's traceability, and just educated people about food in general. And also, I think during lockdown, there's been a big emphasis on localism. Farm shops are just one example, there's many others. But when it comes to food, the carrots we eat usually are grown just a few miles from where we live. You don't have to transport them very far. You don't have to use air miles. You don't have to use fuel. what an help to climate change that will be when we take it seriously, because avocados, for example, which we all love, are flown in or shipped in miles. Is it right in the future that we continue to eat and expect everything available in our supermarkets all of the time? I just leave that as a last thought. Maybe we should be eating seasonally as we really tackle and think seriously about climate change in the future. So how do we make the rural voice heard? 5 suggestions from me. I say you'll probably have lots and lots of others that you want to share, but those are just my first 5 suggestions. Thanks for listening.
Okay, we're going to go back into breakout rooms. We're just going to have a short breakout room now of about 5 minutes. Couple of questions that you might want to talk about. One is about what support is needed in order to equip us to share the rural voice. And the second is just to think if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Richard or Sarah, when we have our last brief time back together. So off into the groups now. Okay, folks, welcome back. Sorry if that was a bit of a briefer session. We're just going to have a few minutes when we've got an opportunity to ask questions of Richard and Sarah, particularly reflecting on the first session and what they shared with us about the Cumbria situation. So if anybody's got a question, if they want to put it into chat, I'm just going to start with a question which actually came in chat earlier on. So I'll ask it to Richard and Sarah, whichever of them wants to answer can answer. And the question came into chat that said, how successful has the ecumenical work in Cumbria been in terms of church growth, both in terms of numbers and commitment? So just one of you want to answer that.
Do we both just have a quick go at that one? If I just kick off very, very briefly.
Yeah, they need to be brief answers, yeah.
It's early days yet, but the fall off of people leaving membership and dying off has certainly been much less since we started working together. And there's all these new fresh expressions which Sarah was talking about, which have brought in lots and lots of new people.
Okay, thank you. If you've got a question, would you like to put it in the chat? Otherwise, I'll just carry on making questions. A comment really from the group that I was in the first time round, we talked about the challenges of changing leadership and the way that if leadership changes, sometimes that can change the dynamics of working together as churches. I just wondered if you had anything to share about that and whether there was value in actually putting structures in place so that even though the two of you have moved on, hopefully things have continued to be in place. Have you got any thoughts about that?
You do that one, Sarah?
So the question is there a risk about ecumenism when people move on? Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And without a shadow of a doubt. I think what the only thing that I think that can be done to try and reduce or mitigate that issue is to try and build relationship in a multitude of ways. So the balance to which we had in Cumbria between the county and the local, I think it's about the fact that at a county level we were genuinely passionate about it, and so therefore everything that we put in place, I put in place within the URC in Cumbria, and I know Richard did similarly within the Methodist district, and our Anglican friend and colleague did too. you can put things, you can put structures in place to make it harder for anybody to come along and undo what you've done. So mission communities at local level would be an example of that. So yes, of course, you could get probably a new vicar, you know, let's be honest, but not necessarily, who will say, actually, I don't want to do this mission community thing any longer. Whereas actually, if you've built it well and you've done your foundations and you've got the local people who are passionate about it too, it makes it much harder for anybody to do that. And we did the same thing at county level, so that, and actually, obviously, Richard and I aren't in Cumbria any longer, so things have changed. So we put mechanisms in place to try, to try and make it harder to undo what we did.
And in all the profiles, all the ministerial profiles at every single level, people knew they were coming to an ecumenical county, and if they weren't prepared to go along with that, we actually said, we don't want you. Yeah.
I mean, we included the ecumenical county within welcome and induction services, for example. So the covenant was read. New ministers coming in were asked to support it. Okay. And again, if you've publicly said that you support something at your welcome or your induction, it's harder to go back on that.
Okay, just a question about church structures and the way in which we often get bound up within our own denominations. What you obviously have been able to put some things in place that have allowed ministry to operate across different denominations. How straightforward was that? Did you have challenges doing that?
Sarah, off you go. You're better at this than I am. I'm not interested.
Things never change. This is the first time that Richard and I have worked together since we both left Cumbria. So in terms of structures and things, so I think, Richard, when you did your presentation, you spoke about the CPEA, so the Covenant Partnership in an Extended Area. So that was a really helpful bit of a process which helped with that. So that then meant that we were able to make the whole county an LEP in a way.
Right.
So therefore we found that we could share, and the issue is with the Church of England, because obviously Methodism and URC, we recognise each other's ministries in any event. But it meant that when it came to our work with the Church of England, that any minister, if you were authorised to do something within your own tradition, you could do it in any of the others, except for weddings. That was the only thing where we couldn't. It didn't work because the legislation for weddings works differently. So, and then the canons of the Church of England also enable that, and we had a really supportive diocesan bishop, which who would always say yes. And we probably would, if truth be told, would say yes sometimes to things that perhaps he shouldn't have said yes to, but he did. So,
yeah, and that interesting, that comes back to the sort of relationships and individuals, doesn't it? That if you've got the right person in the right place, it kind of came over very much from your talk that it was a God-given moment that you were willing to respond to, and yeah. Okay, I'm going to draw those together because we're about up to our time. I've just got one or two bits of information to give as we finish off, and then Richard's going to lead us in prayer. First of all, thank you to Richard and to Sarah for coming and giving up your time and sharing with us. What you share is really inspirational. We're thankful for the situation in Cumbria. We're thankful that it continues, despite the fact that you've moved on to other places to share your ministry in other ways. But thank you for sharing that. Thank you to Catherine, who's kept us all going with our technical stuff, and to our facilitators. And thank you to everyone who's attended today. Our next Positively Rural event is on March the 18th, and we're actually going for an evening slot next time because we've had a request that obviously some people are working in the day, and so we're going to try an evening and see how that works. So we're going to do that at 7:30 on May the 18th. And the theme will be using festivals as outreach, and the speaker will be Elizabeth Clark. And if you like to plan ahead, we have another one planned after that, which will be on the 7th of July at 1 o'clock, thinking about countryside challenges. We've got Rachel Hallos from the NFU and somebody from the Arthur Rank Centre. So that's the 7th of July back at 1 o'clock. So that's future events. We're saving the chat from today, and we'll try and go through and pick out. I know there's been some requests for some of the videos and different things that have been mentioned. We'll try and make sure that gets sent round. But I'm just going to hand over to Richard now. He's going to close in prayer.
Right, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everybody. Let us pray. As we continue on our way, may we know that God goes before us by the strength of his Spirit. May we share our faith with the uncertain, share your love with the unlovely, and share your presence with the lonely, and share God with everyone, just as God has shared himself with us in the unfading blessing of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Saviour. Amen.
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 Thank you, Richard.